welcome to episode 27 of the Offsite podcast, where we chat all things construction and technology. My name's Carlos Cavallo.
And I'm Jason Lancini. G'day, Carlos. How are you?
Pretty good, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm good, mate. I think for those that would have listened like in order and listened to the last episode, there was a distinct sound of someone screaming, like a small child screaming in the background. Luckily, we're recording this on Halloween, so I think we've avoided the issue for this week at least.
It did cross my mind to joke to you that we were doing it in fancy dress just to see if there was a small child you'd turn up with a mask on, but
I'm
maybe
yeah, no,
next
I'm
year.
in fancy dress. This is a shirt is what I do. So today we have a guest joining us. I This is a topic that like I've put forward and I've wanted to talk about for a while in this forum. And I guess to set it up before I intro the guest, one of the things that we see at Apex when we talk to lots and lots of projects in both in the UK, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Asia, is a pretty um, interesting divide between projects where there's this sort of cohesive relationship between the planning, project controls functions and the construction delivery teams, and other projects where there's a kind of odd divide or tension. And today's guest is a planning manager with lots and lots of experience in major infrastructure projects in Australia. He works for CPB. So, for those in the UK, it's one of, if not the largest contractor in Australia, and is currently the planning manager on a major infrastructure project in Sydney called the Warringah Freeway Upgrade. Adam Walter is joining us. Adam, thank you very much for taking the time, mate.
Jason, Carlos, thanks for having me.
Now, Adam, the reason I thought it would be pertinent to have you to join us for this conversation is that you definitely, like, in my opinion, from what I've observed and talking to the people that you work with and seeing how you sort of interact with people on your project, sort of epitomize that one extreme of that relationship, which is kind of this planning and construction team working together ethos. But maybe to set up and set the scene and sort of set up the conversation, I kind of posited this idea that you get teams in both camps. One where there's a bit of finger pointing, argy-bargy, siloed, disconnected. People don't know, left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. And then there's sort of this healthy relationship. Is that something that you would agree exists?
Yes, absolutely. And I think if I look back at my career and my journey, I probably started at the other end of the spectrum. My background was I started as a consultant, got straight into planning, and was fortunate enough to start on an infrastructure project where I was that guy, that planner that sits in the corner and bashes away at P6, not really having much sort of understanding or input into what was going out on site. And I think slowly, as my career has progressed, I've been able to navigate to what you described today, being much more integrated with the construction team.
And like, to get to that state of integration, I imagine it's a very active process to get there. It's probably, I wouldn't call it the like default relationship. I think on average, it feels like it's easy for people to by default sink into the like, this is my job, that's your job. When there's a problem, you do your job, I do my job type of attitude. Do you think that's true? And what does it take to have that more collaborative or connected approach?
So I think there's a couple of aspects to it, but I think for me, I look at planning and project controls as really needing to be an extension of that delivery team and not sit separately. And certainly I think from my experience in Australia, there's a lot of not just the accountability, but the responsibility for everything across an infrastructure project ultimately sits with our engineers. While we've got all the functional supports, they're primarily responsible for delivering and inputs into everything. And effectively, when you look at an integrated master program, that's what it is. So it makes sense that then you need to really team up with the construction team and the guys who are delivering it to make your program happen and make it work.
And so, but like, to double click on that, what does it actually like take on a day-to-day, week-to-week, like goal setting basis to have a team that kind of gets there?
Yeah. So step one for me, and the most important thing is, as a planner, you need to be sitting amongst the construction team. So not next to the secretary, not next to the office manager, not outside the project director's office. You need to be sitting in and amongst all the
And
engineers.
controversially,
And
not work from home.
yeah, that's a different topic and a challenging topic. But I think in terms of, if you want to develop high performing teams and you want that real integration, I say to my team that you guys need to be in there with your engineers. And then an extension to myself, and certainly something I learned from the Life project, is I sit outside the construction director's office, like literally outside his door, because it's the same relationship no matter which way you look at it. And so he's very quick to be able to pull me in. I probably eavesdrop far too much and pull myself in. But that's effectively the way that I see it is step one. You need to be sitting in and amongst the construction team. And then I think the next part is when I look at a short-term planning process that we run with, it's my guys need to be there and attending. And they may not think they're getting a lot of value from it, that they can sort of sit there and take the short-term program. But the planners who add a lot of value, in my opinion, are the ones who then, while they're talking through their short-term programs, is providing input as to what would happen in the long-term program based on some of those decisions. So for me, that's a couple of the key aspects.
I think, which is interesting, there's a fine line to walk, especially when it comes to like that short-term planning. Carlos, you probably see this a bit in the UK, where you can easily see that helpful planner, as things get busy on the project, cross over the line to essentially doing the short-term plan, the engineers. Is that something that you see, Carlos? And then Adam, is that like a risk?
Yeah, I think there's that. I think teams need to understand like where the sort of the line is. So for us, and what you said earlier, Adam, about like the planners need to be in and amongst the engineers in the office. Obviously, I'm come from a commercial background, and it was essential that you actually sit with the engineers, because it's everything that's useful, relevant, and current. Like you hear just from sitting around the team, right? Otherwise, you're sort of away and only seeing the world through the commercial communication sort of aspect. So that's super important. But I think there's definitely this responsibility line. So for example, some planners on projects they really struggle to let go of the short-term plan because they feel like it's an extension of the master schedule, which needs to be controlled and constrained and like monitored in this rigorous way. But a well-performing project this is what we plan to do. And it's about monitoring the difference and seeing where they differ, not stopping them change it, but actually, what do they plan to do out in the field is the most important information you could possibly get to then think about the master schedule and the effect on program milestone and everything else. So I think there is that line. Here, the best projects we see, it is the engineers wholly owning those plans. But yeah, 100% we see planners that don't want to let go of anything, and they think planners their responsibility, especially when you look at non-infrastructure and you go into the building world. Delivery teams don't really own the schedule. They sort of mark up copies that are printed off of the core program. So yeah, I think there's a line, there's a sweet spot that works really well for sure. Yeah, to make sure that the responsibility lies with those like actually accountable for delivering those works.
Yeah. Congratulations for 27 episodes in a row mentioning from a commercial or quantity surveyor background. So for those playing the drinking game, that's the cue. Adam, is that like planners like being too helpful thing that you think is a real thing, or no?
No, it absolutely is. But I take it probably a different view to it these days. And look, I've been there myself where I've done that, trying to help out, think it's the right thing. But when you take a step back and have a look at it, what's the purpose of the short-term program? So for me, the purpose of the short-term program is for the engineers and the supervisors to plan their works for the next 3 weeks and coordinate amongst their other teams. And a byproduct of that is then its usefulness and input into the integrated master program. If my construction teams don't want to do a short-term program, then they don't have to, right? And what I mean by that is that the short-term planning process, I'm not accountable for. I've got a program, right? I manage the integrated master program, right? For me, the short-term planning process is for our construction teams. And what we get from that is super helpful and super important, and it drives accountability and ownership. But if my construction teams don't want to do it, don't do it. No problems. I know what will happen. We've all seen it, where projects will go a certain way with teams that don't do that. But yeah, I try to tell my guys that, but I think it's something that comes from experience. And I think, it's fortunate now these days, there's some short-term planning tools out there where you can see who is moving the tasks around and doing the status. So it helps me with some ominous conversations with people in my team. There's nowhere to hide these days. So,
But
You mentioned there that-
yeah, what you're saying is like over-index on supporting people that want to make it work, but not doing people's job for them is like kind of
Well,
where you're.
yeah, correct. If a team is doing a short-term program just to tick a box because they're supposed to do it as part of the weekly process, I would say don't do it. Like it's not adding any value, right? I can still update my integrated master program without it. You as a planner updating that is not going to drive anything happening on site, right? It's a different conversation that needs to be had, which is a difficult one as to why are you not doing it? Why are you not buying in? But again, that's something that from my point of view comes with the experience and having seen the wheels fall off, and then you put the wheels back on and try and move forward.
Awesome. Carlos, sorry, you had a question before.
I was actually asking the same thing you were then. But another thing to touch on there. So you mentioned that like if members of the construction team don't want to do a short-term plan, you won't force them. That sounds like it's an optional thing. So do projects not mandate this process that seems core to everything that they're doing? Or is it more of a case of they're reverting back to like a whiteboard or like a different method of communication? Because surely they can't do nothing.
Yeah, so I would say from my experience, it is mandated, but the accountability and the ownership sits with the construction team. So i.e. it's mandated and expected from the construction director. And we use a few techniques that my team do. As an example, we will email out the short-term programs to the whole team on a weekly basis. The level of detail that go into that programs, I can see who's really buying into it and who's really not. And look, there's different ways to do it. Do you know what I mean? Like, but yeah, that's while it's mandated, they're not all doing it to really add value to help drive site. Some people are just doing it to tick a box.
Touching on the project control side of your sort of role, when you go about sort of defining like a process, or like when we think about the collection of data, is that another line that's quite easy to cross where you could end up putting burden on a team to do something which enables project controls to function well, and not like the project controls function like gathering data to do that, if that makes sense? Like, how do you draw the line there so it's not like a non-value add for the delivery team because they feel like they're doing something just to like enable a report which they don't care for?
Yeah, so I think I try and give my guys a pretty free rein in that space to try and look for avenues where they may think they can help the delivery team and the construction team and come up with ideas. And sometimes, and I'll do it myself. And sometimes I'll present something and I can see it just doesn't quite hit the mark. Or other times I'll present something and I can see it sort of resonates. I think in the planning and project control space, I think that's part of your role, is to try and have a look at different avenues to where you can add value. You look at things through a different lens. You've got access to data in a different way. And, you're dealing with people and relationships and people who do things differently. And something might work for one team that doesn't work for another. So I'm pretty open about that. I think try and find something that works for you, that strikes the balance and can make a bit of a difference.
Carlos, that's a super interesting question as well. Like tying together something Adam said before about how it's like the engineers that deliver the job, and your question around adding processes or things for them to do in order to generate a report. There's so many examples that I see where supposed like support functions aren't really supporting. They're like adding work for the engineer. It's like they're flipping it and they're not support. They're like whatever anti-support is. If I've had better English, I'd put the right word in there. But so yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, that's the one. We'll put that in post. So, Adam, I heard a rumor a while ago that at some point you had like flirted with the idea of going down sort of an engineering or construction path, which kind of got me thinking around like, is there something to the idea that like the best planners and planning teams have a sort of affinity for the construction team or even come from that background? To know whether you have thoughts on that.
Yeah. So